gentlemen, ghouls and goblins, welcome to a Halloween edition of Human Energy Field. How spooky this episode is going to get, we have yet to decide, so stick with us and you will find out as we make it up as we go along. How are you doing tonight, Jamie? You feeling particularly spooky and scary?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the how thin the veil is between this world and the next on a day like today. I think it's worth noting that, for full disclosure, we didn't necessarily plan to sit down and record on Halloween. So if this goes in a Halloween direction, then great. If it doesn't, then it's because we haven't really planned it that way.
Yeah, literally just sat down and you said we're recording on Halloween, and I was like, oh yeah, we are.
Oh shit, yeah.
Just like last year when we recorded on Bonfire Night and we didn't even realise it was Bonfire Night.
Until all three of us had fireworks in the background. Yeah. Well, that's it. So get your Ouija boards out, and your tarot decks, and your black candles, and your EMF readers, and your get all your ghost hunting kit ready.
Oh, I was with you, and then you said EMF readers, and now that just took it to another level. That did. I'm well excited now.
White noise recorders and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, love it. We should do a ghost hunting thing, but that's for the future. Look, already we're getting off tangent, and we haven't even got onto a tangent yet. But fuck's sake, man. I think it's going to be prudent, and I know the listeners are probably waiting with bated breath for this episode, or at least this segment. Probably the best idea if we start by talking about Dune. What do you think?
I think everybody else is talking about Dune, so why shouldn't we?
Yeah, because that's how we do things here, isn't it?
No, we should talk about Dune. It's obviously really big right now. A lot of people have either seen it or going to see it or have said it, or a lot of people we know are reading it. So it's certainly on our radar, and it has been for a long time, and now it's on a big mainstream radar. So I think it's definitely worth having a chat about, especially as you've seen it
very recently in 4K Dolby, which is relevant later to this discussion. I think you have not seen this, nor do you intend to see it in the cinema. Is that correct?
Correct. I will be watching it. It's not like I'm going to boycott it or anything. I've been very vocal on Instagram, etc., and in the Discord about the fact that I haven't necessarily enjoyed the trailers and the way they look. That would never stop me watching it. I always make my full judgment when I've watched something, but I won't be rushing to the cinema to see it. That's a personal thing. I don't really like the cinema anyway, as an experience, but I will be watching it as soon as it's available to watch in the comfort of my own home. Yeah.
Wicked. Okay. And to be honest, I'm quite looking forward to being able to talk to you about this film, having seen it and you haven't, because like yourself, when I saw the trailers, I was a bit underwhelmed. I was a little bit kind of left wanting... I don't know, I didn't feel too hyped going into it, to be honest. I didn't know what to expect, and Dune is a lot of things to me. Me and you both are huge Dune fans, and I think we've said before, it's one of those things where, I mean, this book is known as almost unfilmable, but all the best bits you could never really commit to a screen and it be effective. Like, the God Emperor will never be as scary on a screen as he is in my head, for example.
Oh, well, I mean, we're already jumping forward several books, but I agree, yes.
You take my point, right?
Yeah.
So going into it, I was a little bit kind of skeptical about where it was going to go and how they were going to do it. Now, spoilers will follow for this conversation, I imagine, but if you have not read a 50-year-old book, then I guess pause and go away and get stuck in, because it's really good. I think it's big enough in the kind of pop culture consciousness at this point, isn't it, that I feel quite happy talking about it with mild to middling spoilers.
Yeah, it's not like it just came out yesterday or anything. Anyone who's really keen to see it will have done. And as you say, like, I mean, the plot has been floating around for half a century, so we're not going to provide mega spoilers. One of the big questions I wanted to ask you before you get into it, actually, and I don't know the answer to this, how far through the first book does the movie get?
Right, so as you have rightly heard, it is part one of a two-part thing.
Yeah.
The first film ends with Paul and Jessica being taken into the Fremen.
Oh, so they go when they get out into the desert and Yeah. All right. Interesting. As a slight tangent before you continue on that, that's where Frank Herbert's Winds of Dune slots into the narrative, I believe. Right.
Winds actually, hang on. Wasn't Winds a prequel with younger Paul?
Yes, but narratively it takes place as Jessica is telling Paul a story about the past. So it's almost like a flashback, but it takes place in the narrative of the first couple of books, and it's actually written by Frank, and it's one of the ones I always tell people to read because it is written by Frank Herbert rather than by Kevin G. Anderson and Herbert's son. And there's a lot of little interesting background about the Atreides relationship with some other big power brokers in the Dune universe, and a little view into Paul's childhood, off Arrakis, obviously. But I can't remember now. It's been a while, but I can't remember exactly where it fits in. But I can't remember if it fits in mid first book or if it slots in between the first and the second book. But
okay, I've just looked it up in that time. Winds of Dune is a direct sequel to Dune Messiah.
Right. So it comes after Dune Messiah. Right. Got you. Right, that makes sense. Okay, so we're way before that, so we don't even need to worry about Winds of Dune right now. So,
way before.
Yeah, way before. Okay. Cool.
And already people who've only read the first book are like, what the fuck are these two talking about?
Yeah, Winds of what?
What? But there's a lot of that. So, Dune, Denis Villeneuve. It's a real labour of love, I think. I get the impression, having watched interviews and read articles and stuff from this director, who I think we're all quite familiar with, but do go back through his filmography if you're not, particularly Sicario, which is just a great film. It's the sort of film Villeneuve wanted to do since he was a young boy, and he spent the whole film making sure that it was his vision. So that's a plus for me, first of all. It's not a big kind of corporate cash-in. It's not, we've ran out of ideas, what can we film next from a Hollywood studio? It's this visionary director who has a budget and a team of his own, and as far as he's aware, the skills now at a point in his career where he can adapt his favourite book. So going into it knowing that, I was on his side, if you like, do you know what I mean? He draws on his own kind of influences for it, so while it's not my Dune, quote unquote, I'm doing quotation marks with my fingers there, I don't consider it my Dune. It is, however, definitely a fan's Dune, if you like. A lot of the big touchstones, he makes a real point of having things feel old in a way that really works. Like the sandworm, right? They stupidly revealed the sandworm in the trailer, which I don't think they should have done, but we all know what the sandworm looks like now from the new film. Personally, I think sandworms should be glowing like furnaces inside. You know, they're the life giver of the desert, aren't they? Shai Hulud. It should be this huge, big furnace that lives in the sand, and it's like the only life-giving thing in the desert, is how I imagined the worms to be. And in the film, they're kind of like cold and dark, and they're huge, but they don't have this fire to them that I always imagine them having. You know, it doesn't look like it smells of cinnamon. Do you know what I mean? And then I think I watched an interview or something, but I learned he's based the design of the sandworms off, basically tried to make them look as prehistoric as possible, as much like a fossilized creature from our planet as possible. And I thought, oh, you know what, actually, approaching it from that direction, I guess he did a good job. So I found myself watching this film and constantly making those kind of compromises, going, well, it's not my Dune, but for what it is, it's actually quite good. And that kind of toing and froing kept me going throughout most of the film. And to add to that point about time, because I was thinking about this, I mean, look, it would be great to have films of this quality for all 6 books. I love all 6 books. I know that the last 2 get a bit of a bad rep, but I love all of them. I love Heretics. I love Chapter House. I think it's a great story, and it would be good to have films of this caliber for all of them. One of the reasons that I like Dune so much is because of the time scales that it takes place over. And this is just the first film, and it's just part 1 of the first book. But the passages of time are evident, and he makes it feel old in a way that is really effective. He has got a great sense of scale. He makes things feel big and old, and that's satisfying to me. I know it's just part one of the first book, so you don't get the sense of time that is something that's a real draw for me as a fan of the 6 Dune books. Is how long these timescales that the events of the book take place over, but he managed to get it feeling old in the film, and I think he did that really well. So that's a plus from me. First of all, it just everything feels like it grounded and lived in, and I mean, for a high concept science fiction film, it feels real, which is an achievement, right?
Yeah, I mean, to jump in there and level one of my as yet uneducated opinions on the matter based purely on trailers and what I've seen online. The palette looks very washed out. It looks very kind of very, very misty, very grey, very kind of like when we're talking about our Dune in quotation marks, people who have been into this franchise for a long time will have watched the documentary on Jodorowsky's Dune, and may have watched the straight to TV adaptation, and looked at some of the aesthetics that have been involved in those kind of things. And I want a little bit more pomp and circumstance in my Dune. I want a little bit more theatre. I want a little bit more circus. And when I look at this, and I hate to reduce it to something like this, but is this just Prometheus with another story behind it? It just looks like the suits look the same, the landscapes just look grey and what's that? Does the entire movie do that, or are we trekked to any sort of light and kind of are we trekked to any spectacle aesthetically, or are we constantly in this kind of miasma of fucking dust?
I mean, it's half and half. You're right, the palette is not as bright or vibrant as I would have liked it to be. But again, that goes back to just the overall feel that he was going for is just completely kind of a different path to walk down than the one I imagine you or I would. It's not the Mobius Jodorowsky type Dune that exists in my head with purple and yellow swirls and a blazing blue sky. It's not that. So I had to kind of put my reservations aside, sitting down into it. However, there is some great uses of colour. There's a particular great night scene that happens quite early on with Gunny Halleck, and that was like crazy to watch on a big screen. The depictions of Dune itself as a planet are again kind of muted in terms of the colour. But then you got to think, well, I know they were filming on a real planet, so that they can't just. I'm glad that they went out to the deserts of Jordan and they didn't do it on a green screen like 300 or something, So again, you're kind of making those compromises. Do you know what I mean? It's all about, okay, well, how much of this film that exists in my head can you actually capture on a camera? And the middle ground is, well, let's go out to a real desert that probably isn't the completely endless, perfect formed sand dunes with these patches of spice around them, but is nevertheless as close as we can get. You don't want to shoot in a set, do you? You want to shoot out on location somewhere. So again, it's about those compromises. But you're right, the colour palette in the trailer is quite indicative of the film. However, he has said, in the time since I've watched this to the time we're recording this, the second part has been confirmed. Because it was touch and go for a minute. It basically relied on the feedback from the audiences.
Well, of course, I mean, we live in a world where series, whether they're on Amazon or Netflix or anywhere, are at the constant mercy of financial numbers, basically, let's put it that way, and viewing numbers as to whether something is continued or dumped. And, it can go right to the wire with things. But, I mean, to think about the fact that how much money and time must have been spent on this movie to not even know that you might finish the first book. I mean, that's ludicrous in a way. I mean, I'm glad that they're going to do the second one. Whether I enjoy the first one or not, I don't want to take away the enjoyment of other people who maybe haven't read the books and whatever, watching half a movie and then never getting to see the other half. I mean, that would have been just such an absolute travesty.
It would have been, yeah. It would have been really tragic and messy too, real messy. But again, I think it's
It certainly would have stopped anybody approaching the license again ever.
Yeah, it would have killed it dead, wouldn't it? Wow, yeah. But again, I think that speaks to the fact that this is a labour of love by the director, because how unorthodox is that, right? You don't hear about filmmakers doing that, really.
I mean, overall, I don't want to be reductive, but as a fan of the books, do you find this when you sat down? Is this a success?
Pause for effect. Yeah, it's
Right.
it is. It's a good film. It is a good film.
Okay.
I have to get over the fact that it's not the Dune that I would like to see. It is, however, a really good Dune. It's a good Dune.
Do you think there's an element that most of the people, let's be honest, maybe 99% of the people watching it, they won't have a Dune in their head because they've never read the book. So, I mean, to a lot of people, whatever he presents as a director is Dune to them, and probably always will be. There will be, of course, people who will go backwards and read the book because of the movie, but as we know, a lot of people don't. And let's be honest, Dune's pretty hard work. I mean, even for people who read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, Dune can be quite impenetrable, especially the first couple of books.
Agreed. And I can imagine people seeing the film, going back to try and read the novel, and then stumbling and not being able to finish the first book. I can definitely see that happening. You know, I'm sure sales of the first book will skyrocket, and then sales of the next 5 won't. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm sure that is taking place as we speak across the Western world. And if people's idea of Dune is now this film and this vision, then that doesn't anger me. You know, I'm quite happy for people to go, oh, I really like Dune with Timothée Chalamet. Oh, okay, great. I'm glad you're on board now, you know. It's good enough for me to be happy with as a vehicle for people to come into this universe that people like me and yourself love so much. And whenever they had questions on set about the direction they were going in, they'd refer back to the book to answer those questions, whether it was the music or, you know, Hans Zimmer had copies of Dune lying around when he was making the soundtrack for this film, so, or the choreography or anything else. They was always referring back to the book to start up that conversation with Frank Herbert again by talking to him through the book, if you like, and saying, okay, what do we do here? What's the tone we're going for, etc. So
it'd be really interesting. I don't know the answer to this, but it'd be really interesting to know whether the people trying to answer these questions would have gone straight to the Herbert estate and Kevin G. Anderson, who have been obviously responsible for the prequel and kind of side novels and all of the other novels post the first 6, because their vision of the Dune universe is quite different, in my opinion, to Frank's kind of purist 6 books. You know, they turn it into a much wider, much bigger sci-fi opera in a way, you know, space opera, especially when you get into the books about the Butlerian Jihad and you know, all that kind of the wars that happened and stuff. So I'd be interested to know how much those new writers who are pushing forward the Dune universe have had a artistic say in how this first book has been presented on screen.
yeah, you're right. I've not read outside of Frank Herbert's work, so I couldn't say whether or not it draws on what Brian got up to. I don't know, man. I don't know, but I'm sure as the Herbert estate, if you like, I'm sure they were in communication at some point. But it's very much a 14-year-old filmmaker kid read the Dune book and then grew up and made a film, is how I see this film being. It's this sort of linear process. So if they were involved, I'd like to think it wasn't very heavily.
Do you think it has all of the requisite parts to be commercially successful, long term?
No.
Oh, strong.
Yeah, I mean, not as it stands. I think it's missing a third act. First of all, there's no escaping it. Cut the film off halfway through the book, more or less. So, you know, if I was to show this film to someone and say, all right, what do you think of that as it stands? The first thing they'd do is, well, where's the rest of it, you know?
I mean, narratively, it's all well and good setting things up, but without the emotional payoff to some of these results, you are left empty, no matter what it is, whether it's a story or a movie or a TV or whatever. And it's all well and good if you have to wait a week for the next part, but I mean, waiting probably years. Let's be honest, maybe 2 years for the next part. I mean, that's a long ask, right?
Yeah, it is. And again, very unorthodox, especially in the sort of today's kind of Hollywood climate. This isn't how things are done. So, I mean, that's a kind of a draw for me. It's kind of an appeal. I'm like, whoa, this guy's just made fucking part one of a film without any idea whether part two will be made. Just left it to chance, but he loves it so much. That's cool, man. I kind of respect that, you know?
I mean, am I right in thinking the running time is around 3 hours, right? I mean,
it's just shy of 3 hours.
Yeah. Right. I mean, is there an argument that in order to break convention, which, you know, filmmakers can do now, I think we live in a world where, you know, it's not the 80s. Every movie doesn't have to run an hour and a half with a sex scene and an action scene and a car chase and whatever. You know, we don't live in these kind of, you know, we have to tick these formulaic boxes. But is there an argument that maybe he should have just done a 6-hour movie and just completed book one and done?
No, what he should have done is made a 14-hour film with Salvador Dali as the Emperor, casting his son in the main role of Paul Atreides.
Of course.
Yeah. No, I don't know, man. I think there's that kind of balance that he must be really torn in negotiations with Hollywood executives about a way to release this. You know, I'm sure when he was pitching it, he must have had to compromise and say, look, if I want to do this, it's got to be in 2 parts. I think because he's a fan of the novel as well. You forget there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and he actually got quite a lot of the novel in the first part. So, and there's a lot of things they were mentioning. I was like, they put that in. Because, you know, usually film adaptations, they leave a lot of stuff out. So half of the stuff I was expecting to not hear about at all. And they did miss some parts out. For example, there's almost no explanation about the Butlerian Jihad or the idea of there being no computers or AI. That's not really mentioned much.
To be fair, I mean, hearkening, it's been a long time since I read the first book, but when I cast my mind back to having read that, I think there's a lot of assumptions made for the reader, and actually they don't go into a lot of detail in the first book about why they were not thinking computers and that. It's just part of the assumed background, and I think we kind of learn about that bit by bit through conversation, so it's not something that's explicitly stated in the first book, I don't think.
It's not, but I love that. I love the way they just world build through passive dialogue.
In a way, it's like Star Wars, the original Star Wars, when they mention the Clone Wars and nobody knows what the hell it is. It's that Butlerian Jihad mention, and we think, oh wow, what is that? You know, and then in 40k, for the people who are into 40k, it's that idea of the Horus Heresy. All of these amazing events in the past, which are mythical, almost legendary kind of, you know, War of Troy style size battles that affect the modern day, but are barely mentioned because it's assumed that most people living in the universe have a full knowledge of them, but we as the audience are only learning about them through snippets of the casual conversations between these protagonists. So yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think it would have been too much to maybe go into explaining the full background to the Butlerian Jihad, which, let's be honest, I mean, they've spent books, thousands of pages doing that. So maybe that's a good thing to do to avoid that, you know?
I mean, yeah, no, you're right. I agree with that for sure. It's such a great writing convention to drop stuff in, kind of sprinkled around a book, and films don't really get the same opportunity to do that. So, you know, the fact that they didn't have a long explanation, good. I don't want one. And to be honest, furthering on from that point, the film does start with a bit of exposition. There's a kind of montage of the Harkonnens' rule of Arrakis, because obviously the film has to then open with the House Atreides being given control of Arrakis. So before that point, at the very start of the film, there's some opening scenes, many of which are in the trailer, of how the Harkonnens rule Arrakis and how the Fremen are fighting against them and this kind of thing, and voiceovers. And I was going, really? But that, you know, I went to see it with a bunch of people, some of which had never read or knew anything about Dune at all, and for them they were really grateful to have that explanation at the start. And throughout bits of the film, before Paul leaves Caladan, he is studying Arrakis, he's studying the Fremen. He's got a little like holographic teaching device thing, and he watches lectures about, you know, he's teaching himself about the planet he's going to, and obviously that serves to educate the viewer as well on some of the culture of the Fremen and the sandworms and this kind of thing. You kind of your basic Arrakis knowledge, if you like. And to me, I was just watching it going, oh, fucking, can't we just see this play out on screen? This is too much exposition for me. It's too much. You're holding my hand and you're telling me everything when really I just want to see it. But then I spoke with my friends afterwards, and the verdict was we were really happy to have the explanation because we don't know what the fuck Dune is, or what the fuck this planet is, or what the fuck a sandworm is. So it makes sense for us to learn along with the main character. So, you know, there's those kind of film conventions that work better on screen than they do in the book for that kind of thing.
I think there's also what you're hitting on here is the modern idea that directors and creative people in these media almost have to spoon feed the audience to a degree because without being elitist or whatever, you have to assume a certain degree of kind of not just knowledge, but in maybe even intelligence or whatever. I mean, not everybody who sits down to watch this movie is going to be super smart, and that's okay. But neither do you want to separate them from the narrative and stop them enjoying the film. So you maybe want this quick catch-up in order to kind of fill people in. Whereas you're right, a lot of people, who have either experienced the movie or are happy to be confused through a show or a film until something is explained, which I don't think is a commonly held kind of pattern of thought. But I think some people are happy to wait for the payoff. But that's so maybe they're stuck between a rock and a hard place about having to give you enough stuff so that the average viewer, whether such a thing exists, can enjoy the film for what it is, so to speak, at a surface level. And there's an element of dumbing down there, of course there is, but not necessarily in a bad way, just so it can be palatable to the masses.
Yeah, and that it reads on the screen as well. So it's palatable to the masses. Totally, I understand that, but adapting and kind of changing the writing into dialogue and into a screenplay is a task all of its own, and that's going to involve some things getting cut by the nature of the process. I also read apparently this screenplay was written on a MS-DOS program, like a really old word processing program that only contains 40 pages at a time and no more because the memory's so low. So I'm sure whoever wrote that had a great time putting that together on his like old beige mechanical keyboard. But yeah, so you're right. So it does, in some elements I found it lacking, but only as a kind of long-time Dune fan, I guess. As a film, it works on a lot of levels. I think the acting's really good. Although we are left kind of wanting the second half, which I imagine is part of the plan, probably, right? Get people wanting part 2 so we can make it. But that aside, there are a lot of elements in the film that I really enjoyed. The sound design I'm going to get onto in a sec, but Lady Jessica, as in the novel, steals the show completely in the film. Just like in the first book, where she's the best character, she's by far the best character in this film as well.
I want to jump in there on Lady Jessica because it's really interesting to hear that she's presented really well in the movie, because you're absolutely right. In the first book, she does steal the show because she's so many things to so many people. She is wife, she is mother, she is Bene Gesserit, she is like... She fulfills all of these amazing roles. And because of this, I mean, we can put like a modern spin on this, and I'm not even sure that Frank Herbert intended this in any fashion. She's a very strong, very modern female role model, in my opinion. And because of the time that she's come from, chronologically, when she was first published, I mean, she's a perfect female role model for modern cinema-going audiences, right? So I'm glad that she's presented that way.
Yeah, she's sensitive, she's caring, and she has this innate Bene Gesserit power that is kind of latent within her. What I love the most about Lady Jessica, and this is something that is reflected and seen throughout the 5,000 years that the 6 books take place over, she is arguably more than Paul, the most important character in the universe. It was her that first made the choice to love the Duke Leto over her duty to the Bene Gesserit, and in doing so, prematurely created the Kwisatz Haderach as a male instead of a female, right? Because she went off the Bene Gesserit's breeding program. So, Lady Jessica's heart is Dune to me. The fact that
it's
she
a catalyst for all this activity. Yeah, absolutely.
It's everything. Yeah, it's everything. So I love that. I love the fact that one person falling in love can ruin generations and generations of finely crafted programs and breeding processes and all these plans and plots that were put in place over lifetimes and millennia, and then love just changes it all within one person's lifetime. I love that. So to me, Lady Jessica is really important as a character. And even when I saw the casting for the film before I'd seen it, I thought, well, they got her right. She just looks the part. Her acting's superb. She is the voice of the Litany of Fear in the film as well.
Oh, Fear is the mind killer.
And yeah, she's infinitely watchable. So I'm happy that she's still going to be around for part 2 because she's just great, I think.
Well, now that you've mentioned the casting of Lady Jessica, I think it would be remiss of us not to bring up the subject of diversification of the cast and some of the accusations of Dune being a white messiah story, which I've read debunked, but I've also read supported online, and it's been a big thing. It's been the accusations that have been leveled against the film. Having watched it, where does your gut instinct lie with that?
Oh, well, I mean, I want to preface this for anyone who's listening who can't see me. I do have white skin, so I'm maybe not the most informed person to be talking about what is and isn't a kind of white messiah story. But I will say this. I know Dune, the book, was based in part off the adventures of Lawrence of Arabia, right?
Yeah.
Which is also, by the way, excellent film. If you want to go and check out Lawrence of Arabia, it's such a good film. Which was a true story, and that was about a kind of a white gentleman from this upper classes, if you like, the upper echelons of society, who ended up going out into the desert, befriending the nomads there, and then leading them on a rebellion against their oppressors. So, while yes, I acknowledge it very much does have all the hallmarks and trappings of your classic kind of a white knight, Brad Pitt in 12 Years a Slave, Deus Ex Jesus kind of thing, it's right there in front of you. You can't deny it. But I will also say it's also based on a true story. And the Lawrence of Arabia, his story did happen in real life, and that's one of the touchstones that Frank Herbert used. So I don't think that argument is really clear cut. I think there are two ways you can go with it. They do in the film, I think, keep a lot of the Arrakis natives, the people of Arrakeen, anonymous. A lot of the extras are wearing veils or are completely covered head to toe with just their eyes showing. They speak in foreign tongues. There's a kind of Arabic lilt to it, which, as drawing from the book, is appreciated. But they're quite anonymized as a people, and I don't think that does them any favors. I think they could have done a bit more to make Arrakeen seem human and lived in. They kind of gloss over the city a little bit, and the design of the city is not great either, and it's kind of small. And I just imagine it to be more bustling and more vibrant, and like bazaars and marketplaces and stuff
Marrakesh,
with silks.
Istanbul, all these kind of amazing influences, which could have been put to use,
Yes, and it's not in the film. It just isn't. And they anonymise the natives quite a bit, so I don't think they've done themselves any favours in that regard when it comes to kind of, if I was going to defend this film against being a white messiah narrative.
But I think one of the biggest kind of accusations is the casting of the Fremen, with basically with people that are assumed to be not of the correct cultural background, whereas the novel is concerned. So I think there's a disparity there which is levelled at the film for not casting the Fremen properly. And like I say, it's really tough to know where to and there's been a lot of like fervent defense of the film against these accusations, but the fact that they've managed to break through into the mainstream, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah. What did people expect the casting to look like for a fictional planet thousands of years in the future that doesn't exist?
I think that's part of the defense, is the fact that this is sci-fi, so we can do what we want. But then I think the counter argument to that is we have a responsibility to allow opportunities for actors of certain cultural backgrounds to fulfill the roles which are representing, even in a science fiction trope, the people of that cultural background. And the fact that we have quite a diverse cast for the main protagonists, but then the Fremen have not been given a widely not been given enough opportunity to be fulfilled by people who certain critics think should fulfill those roles. That's where the difficulty lies, I think.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that confuses me. Are you saying that every Fremen actor should be of Arabic descent because the book has an Arabic kind of lilt to it?
There's an argument. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there is an argument online for that, and some critics, very vocal critics, have taken that stance.
Right. I mean, that would be cool as hell to have actual, Arabic speakers and have that accent to the Fremen when they're talking and stuff.
I don't think it's necessarily about the speakers. I think it's about the cultural representation of them on the screen, because that really is the sensitive issue right now, isn't it? What we look at and what we see and what we take in. And I realise I'm kind of with you on this, and I'm kind of raising this because I think anybody listening to it who's really been interested in how this film's been portrayed in the media, not to mention this elephant in the room, I think would be a bit of a mistake and just to gloss over it. But I'm not saying I agree with it, but the fact that it has been mentioned and I have read it online quite a few times means that I'm curious to look at the film and then consider my own biases and think, is this presented well, or actually should it not matter because it's sci-fi, and actually am I trying to lay some kind of modern socio-political guilt system over something that really doesn't need it? Are we going too deep into this? Does it not matter? The fact that we're talking about it is more of a problem than it is, But then I'm not an Arabic person trying to get into acting. So
yeah, exactly.
Like it's really dangerous. I just thought, and I know we are not going. You and I are not going to be able to settle this because there are people who have probably raged about this for thousands of hours online. But I just think to bring up the fact that that is one of the accusations that have been leveled against the film, I think is really interesting. But the fact that it's managed to remain and become popular despite these maybe minor vocalizations about the problems of casting, I think is an interesting point of view, because I think it can be dangerous to just point the finger at any movie where maybe there are chinks in the armor of diversity. But what I'm looking for basically was, I was wondering whether you could defend the diversity of the cast, having watched it. And I'm aware of who's been cast in the role and how diverse the cast is as well, so it's not necessarily on our shoulders. But what I think my question is, having watched it, do you feel you were watching a modern, diverse cast of characters?
I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Maybe
to boil it down, I'm thinking maybe from a viewer's point of view, from an intelligent viewer's point of view, do you feel like the book and justice was done in terms of diversification of the cast?
Yeah, I think while not being a particular fan of the casting, I would say in terms of representation and in terms of making it feel like, you want to watch someone who looks like they're from Dune, don't you? You know what I mean? Or you want to see a lad who looks like he's from Caladan, for example. I think they did a good job with that, yeah. The Fremen, none of the Fremen are white, so I guess Javier Bardem's had a tan, I suppose, and he's all stubbly, and he's a great still guy, by the way. But Zendaya, she's not white. The gentleman whose name escapes me, that Paul fights with the crysknife when he first meets them, also is a great actor who plays Damien in a TV series called Too Old to Die Young, which I definitely recommend anyone watches. He's a great actor. So there's a lot of people of colour in these roles, especially in the Fremen. I think they did a good job. And it contrasts with Timothée Chalamet's pasty little white complexion. So it does a good job of balancing that out as far as I'm concerned. But what would I know,
Yeah, I mean, we can only give our considered, educated opinions. We obviously neither of us are sitting here assuming that our opinions are more valid than anybody else's, and we realise that the the position that we're in, that makes them less valid in some opinions, but whatever. But I just thought, as we were talking about it, I think it's one of the things that I would want to hear people talk about. So that's why I kind of threw it out into the arena, because I don't feel I have an issue with it, but then I think that's very easy for me to say.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's probably the summary of that point in particular. I think I have no problem with it, but that's easy for me to say as well. But I have other problems with the casting, so maybe that is an issue to some people, and I wouldn't be surprised, because there are other elements of the casting that I felt were missing a trick. I'm not a fan of Jason Momoa. I don't think he's a good Duncan Idaho. I don't really like him in anything. I find him quite cringe to watch on screen. I don't think he's a particularly good actor. I've never seen him actually act with his heart. He just seems to just walk around and be super handsome all the time, and that he just gets away with stuff. Which, great looking guy, but I don't think he's a good Duncan. He's not. When I picture Duncan, I don't picture someone who looks like Jason Momoa. But again, not my Dune.
I mean, there can be. I can level those accusations at the David Lynch Dune, and you look at Gurney, and I just think that is not the casting I would have assumed for Gurney.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I mean, there's some really interesting choices being made here, and to be honest, I mirror your views on Jason Momoa. I'm not impressed particularly. I think once the factor wears off from looking at him, there's not a lot there. But I can also understand, commercial choices are being made here as well, and let's not pretend that as much as the director wants to be true to his artistic vision, there is a bums on seats quality to certain actors and certain actresses, and I think we can't ignore the commerciality of these decisions. Which is also quite bizarre, because I don't know how well box office wise Aquaman and whatever has done, but I didn't think it was that good in order to kind of cement this kind of role for Jason Momoa in this movie.
Aquaman the film?
Well, yeah, no, but I mean commercially. I mean, like, was it a flop money wise? Because I'm struggling to look at him as an actor and think, well, hang on, what's he done that we should all be clapping about? I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Well, I just Googled Aquaman's box office performance, and it grossed finally 1.1 billion worldwide, making it the highest global grossing Warner's DC title ever, surpassing Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously within the DC canon there, it doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but within that race, I mean, that's impressive, right? So I mean,
yeah, I guess we're off kilter here, aren't we, mate? The rest of the world is on track.
Yeah. So I mean, there you go. So I mean, there's part of a commercial decision about casting.
And I'm sure that does take into part with where they were going with it. The decision to cast Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides was very specifically done by Denis Villeneuve. He didn't even audition for the role. He just said, I want that kid, and he just chose him. So, he sees something in the role that clearly he had him hallmarked as that's his Paul that he's going for. Timothée Chalamet, for all the bitterness that I have about Timothée Chalamet, basically having to watch him enjoy what is all, in essence, my acting career, I do feel like he brought some humanity to the role. Paul Atreides is a little bit of a Mary Sue. I think he's just good at everything. He's the Lisan Al Gaib. He's also the Kwisatz Haderach. He's also Muad'Dib. He's got the voice. He's got the Bene Gesserit genes. He's also the heir to House Atreides. I think he's got a lot resting on his shoulders, and especially in the last bits of the film when Paul and Jessica end up out in the desert, he does a really good job of bringing some kind of conflict to that role and bringing a bit of unease about his future and where he's going and stuff. As a young Paul, so he does quite well there, I will be honest. From the trailer, I really hated his American accent. I thought, oh no, American Paul, oh no. Sorry, American listeners, there's just something about the American accent in films like this that just really, I just disengage with it entirely. I don't know why. I see Paul Atreides as, he's the heir to a noble house who controls a planet. I just don't imagine him sounding like a kid from New York. you know. And Timothée Chalamet doesn't really do much effort to hide his natural accent, so he does kind of have this like subtle New York kid voice going on. But in the film, I forgot about it. It didn't bother me as much as I thought that it would, which was nice. He's got the right face for that role. He's got the good kind of patrician nose. He looks like his dad, who again, not my first choice, Oscar Isaacs. I would have chosen someone else maybe for the Duke. To be honest, for Paul Atreides, I would have picked an unknown. I would have gone with an unknown actor, a new face no one's seen before, and I would have had that unknown star be his breakout role as Paul, and then from then on, that kid gets to be known as Paul Atreides for the rest of his acting career. I wouldn't have chosen someone who already existed in Hollywood.
If the franchise does well, I mean, that's anywhere between 6 and 12 movies, isn't it? Like, if you're going to do the fucking lot, I mean, that's a lot. That's Harry Potter material, isn't it? You know, like that's never having to work again afterwards. So let's be honest. I mean, that was a throwaway comment, but drawing parallels between the filming of a book series like Dune and comparing that to the filming of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels, I mean, there are real parallels here to be looked at and to be understood. I mean, the demographics are different, and you know the writing quality couldn't be any more different. But but in terms of presenting these books to an audience and then having this momentum to continue this through to the end, I mean, there are similar obstacles and rewards to be had for the entire vehicle that is going to move these licenses forward through these amount of movies. So I mean, it's really interesting to see the difference between Dune Part 1 and whatever the fucking first Harry Potter movie was. What fucking Goblet of Phoenix or whatever fucking
Philosopher's Stone.
What it's called? Philosopher's Stone. Thanks, nerd. But yeah, so,
fuck off! I fucking knew you'd say something. You dickhead.
Whatever that first movie was, which was fucking shit, but people liked it, and moving forward, it's the opposite. We got to grab people with this Dune thing and almost kind of get their vote, their kind of capitalist vote on allowing this machine to power us all the way through God, Emperor, Chapter, House, Heretics. To get to the end of this journey, and we're talking about a decade or more, if not two, before we can even finish this, if it is that successful. And I know we're kind of dragging this out to its like kind of extreme, but is there any point in starting to film a book like Dune if you don't have the fervent and deep-seated desire to finish the job? Because, I mean, that would be like Peter Jackson starting Fellowship and just going, oh, well, fuck, if we don't do Return of the King, it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? Like, of course you gotta fucking do it, man. I mean, this is, you start that journey, you fucking finish that journey.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I don't know whether that same belief has been held at the beginning of this Dune, whether they just think, look, if we finish the first two, it's job done, right? Nobody gives a fuck. Or we might do another one or whatever. I mean, are they really thinking we're going to get to the end of this? I don't know. I really do. Hand on heart, I don't think anybody's really thinking that.
No, and to be honest, that seems to be the same opinion with people who read the books, is that they have no intention of reading the 6, they just read the 1. So I can't imagine that the filmmakers are thinking any different, If we get films of this quality that depict the 6 books, I'm going to be so happy, because they are high-quality films. Production
you'd be fucking old and happy.
yeah, I'll be a skeleton sitting in the cinema seat with like a bearded skeleton.
We're talking years in between each film, so I mean, and we split book 1 into 2 movies. There are several other books in that main series that are just as big, that would require several movies. There are some. I mean, the book 2 and 3, you could probably do a movie each, maybe. But then the minute you get to book 4, 5, and 6, I mean, they're all 2-movie books. If the first one is, without a doubt. So we're talking 10 movies, man. I mean, that's 20 years. Minimum.
I like your optimism, man. I can't see that going through.
I mean, neither can I. But that's the weird argument, isn't it? Why start something if you're not going to fucking finish it?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe it's that throwaway thing, isn't it? Like people can enjoy The Walking Dead for whatever it is, and enjoy Game of Thrones and whatever it is, and they'll enjoy Dune 1, and then do you know what? They'll forget about it because something else has come along later. Whether it's fucking Wheel of Time or whatever the new Lord of the Rings show that's going to come out on Amazon, like whatever is just going to feed that fantasy-shaped box in people's mouths. I don't know. Maybe this is the whole part of this thing.
People just get distracted playing games with squids or something. I'm not really sure what that was. But
that shit. I'm not even going to get into that. Do you know what? I can't believe we're almost at an hour talking about Dune. We're on an RPG podcast, arguably. Yeah, and we're talking about this Dune movie for nearly an hour. So it's sorry, listeners. I apologize to you. But I mean, to be honest, anyone who's been listening to us long enough knows for the last year we love Dune. We've been talking about Dune. So to not give Dune the amount of time we want to talk about it, considering I haven't even fucking watched it yet, is I guess it's to be expected a little bit. So
it's to be expected, yeah.
Yeah, what we'll do in the show notes, I think, is we'll just go like, we talk about Dune for X amount of time, and if you, at 57 minutes, if you want to skip to like the RPG chat, then just fucking do that.
Yeah. Skip first hour if you're not interested in Dune. Yeah.
If you're a Philistine.
yeah, right. So before we finish Dune, I do want to talk about the sound design.
Do it, man.
The voice is in this film, and I was really surprised because I didn't expect that to be something that he would put in. Even though it is a really big part of the book. And the first time you see Paul use the voice in the film, I was like, "Whoa, that's really cool, really good editing, really good design, really good quality to the sound, the way they did it. Good idea as well." Again, it's the sort of thing that's designed to be ancient. So the idea behind him using the voice and the Bene Gesserit sisters using the voice is that they're channeling these, the ancient grandmothers' voices from times long past, and that was the kind of effect that Villeneuve was going for with the voice, and that the soundtrack, the sound effects, particularly some of the sound effects actually, are all best experienced with a cinema quality speakers. So I understand what you're saying. You don't like cinema, that's cool. You want to watch it in the comfort of your own home, that's also cool. If there was ever a time to make an exception to your, and I'm addressing to the listeners now, not just yourself, Jamie, but if there's ever a time to make an exceptions to your usual way of doing things and to your kind of expectations, I would say, if it's possible, go and see this film in a cinema, because more important than seeing it on a big screen is having that sound quality to it. It's the best sound design in a film that I've ever seen, I think.
Or heard.
Or heard, yeah, thanks. And I think even as you could go into it not knowing anything about cinematography or about what goes into a film and still go, whoa, that sounded really good. You don't have to be like a film nerd to notice that there's something special about the way that the sounds come out of the screen and the way that they've designed it together. And that extends to kind of things in film, like the voice and the sounds of the ornithopters taking off and the sounds of the sand brushing against their still suits and this kind of stuff. Obviously that's all world building, and the Hans Zimmer soundtrack really fills in those gaps and paints the rest of the picture really nicely. Villeneuve does a good job of saying, I don't want my actors to speak how they feel. We can say that with the music. So he does a lot of the emotional heavy lifting. He leaves a lot of that up to Hans Zimmer in the score. So that's really my conclusion. I think that's the point I want to end on, and that's something that's advice I give to you as a friend, Jamie. Go and check this film out in the cinema. It's worth the cash. It's worth your time, and I think to see it for the first time, like on a laptop screen on a coffee table, would be to do it a disservice.
Okay, interesting. I think because believe it or not, we are an RPG podcast. I think it would be a shame if I didn't ask you this final question as a postscript to this discussion of Dune. Having come out of viewing it, so take everything else aside, take your love of the license and everything, put that to one side if you can, and put on your viewer's hat for the movie. When you stepped out of this movie, does it make you want to roleplay in that universe?
No.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
Now, I was expecting that answer, and I don't know why, but then I think, is it because it doesn't offer scope for adventure? Is it closed? Or what makes... Because sometimes we can watch something and think, oh, that'd be great to roleplay in that that setting, that background, that world. But then to watch this and then to walk away and go, if I'd only seen that movie and somebody said, do you want to play Dune, the movie role-playing game, I'd say, nah, you're all right. That's a shame, right?
I mean, I guess, but that's coming from someone who knows his role-playing games, you know? I know what I like.
Do you think this will have a knock-on effect on Modiphius's Dune Chronicles of the Imperium new game, you know? Because, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, this is, even though it's not one of these books that's filled with movie shots and all this kind of stuff, it's got its own artwork. I mean, it's been released at a time when it's cash in, right? I mean, it's
a tie-in. It is a tie-in.
Yeah, of course it is. So, I mean, are enough people going to come out of the cinema going, that is a universe I want to role play in, and pick up this book? Or people are going to go, well, yeah, that's cool, but that's boring, man. I don't want to role play on Arrakis. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck?
I just think, I mean, you know, I'm going to compare it to, let's say, Star Wars. Let's take the first Star Wars film, right? Mm-hmm. Even the cantina scene, Luke walks into the cantina, and then in a few seconds, the camera pans around this canteen, and there's a whole cast of characters that we all know and love, all these crazy aliens. And, you know, it makes it feel lived in and alive, and you go, oh, that guy looks like a fucking weirdo, and this guy has got...
There's a Bith Band, there's a Hammerhead, there's
Rodians,
Quarrens, Rodians, do you know what I mean? Like,
that devil guy who's cool as fuck, he's got the horns and the cape and shit.
Deveronian. Yeah, man, all good.
Right, so, I mean, that has a magic to it that makes you want to explore it further, and Dune doesn't really have much like that. It's a story of one person, really, and those sort of things never really translate well into RPGs. It's kind of like, if you'll forgive the tangent, which I'm sure you'll have to because this is Human Energy Field, but if you, Jamie, are familiar with the Witcher series,
I am.
I'm sure we'll cover it at some point in the future. Love The Witcher as a setting, but
season 2 just been confirmed, I think.
Oh yes, the TV series season 2 has been confirmed. Yeah, and since we're talking about it just now, I'll say I've got problems with the casting of Yennefer, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
Hashtag Team Yennefer.
Yeah, let's not get into that.
Let's not get into that right now. Yen is bae. I just think it's not a good world to roleplay in because again it's the story of one character moving through a world, and it doesn't fill you with any I could go into that world and do this or that, because you're just watching someone else do all the things that you want to do, and you no one wants to roleplay in The Witcher and just play Geralt of Rivia, you know.
As another random tangent, I was reading today that they've just confirmed the Lara Croft tabletop RPG. Which is really weird because
right.
you don't play Lara Croft, but you play a Tomb Raider, which actually I think as a role playing background does work.
Yeah, I kind of dig that.
Yeah,
I mean, crawling, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, it's been in the works backwards and forwards since about 2007, I think. But they've just it's been confirmed that this is coming out for the anniversary. So
damn,
really interesting.
Yeah, well, let's cover that in the future. Even if it's really shit, let's just get it on and cover it.
Do you know what? I think what's really interesting about it is it's one of those licenses that a lot of people know, even if they've never played it. Cultural osmosis alone allows you to understand who Lara Croft is. And also, I think the idea, you're right, with The Witcher, it's one man's story, and there aren't other, well, there aren't other kind of witches kicking about that are doing this thing, not in a wide scale sense. But it's not difficult to imagine other people who are doing what Lara Croft is doing in the universe of what we have is, let's call it modern pulp, which is what it is.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's Indiana Jones, isn't it? So to kind of come up with those tropes and put it on a tabletop RPG, I think is interesting. But you're right, Witcher struggles from that, and that was my worry for Dune, because I actually think Dune in general, and I thought this before the movie came out and whatever, is a really hard universe to sell for an RPG.
Yeah.
Because it's so focused on Arrakis and on not just Paul and Jessica, but it's a microcosm of a universe. We're only really interested in Arrakis and the events on Arrakis and the individuals from a few major households and the relationships with the Emperor, Pasha, whatever his name is. And I think the rest of the universe is colour and is background set, but it isn't there to be kind of explored and detailed and whatever. So the reason that Frank Herbert is highlighting what's happening in this very tiny microcosm is because it's the most interesting place in the universe. It's Arrakis, the spice must flow. This is what forms everything. The guilds, the interrelationships between the major houses, everything. The Landsrat, you know. So if you're playing Dune and you're not playing on Arrakis, what are you doing? You have to play Atreides versus Harkonnen on Arrakis to make this a game worth playing. Because if you're not doing that, it's not almost not worth it.
To do a Dune RPG well, you just have to kind of soft reboot the first book, wouldn't you? You just have to have the game that you run just be that, but somewhere else or with different characters.
I don't want to get into it right now because I think a full review of the Modafius game would take another hour, and I don't want to make this a 2-hour Dune thing. So I'm just going to wrap this up in about 30 seconds. The modern Dune RPG tries its best to be all things to all people, but it constantly reminds you surreptitiously that if you're not playing on Arrakis and you're not being Atreides or Atreides related, then you're not really doing Dune properly. And I think that's both its greatest strength and its greatest handicap.
Agreed.
So I think design wise, when they sat down to present this universe to us as gamers, they wanted to provide the whole show, the whole kind of thousands of years of history and the different eras of play, whether it be the Butlerian Jihad or the God Emperor or Arrakis or whatever. But then in every other chapter, in every other case, it just reminds us that actually we should be playing on Arrakis at the exact moment that the first book starts. And to do anything else is kind of not really to do Dune.
Yep.
And that's part of its failing, I think. And that's why I think that my prediction for the RPG game line is it's not going to go very far. You know, they promised a starter box, which I as of us talking still hasn't hit the shelves. They promised, further adventures and campaign books based on different eras and whatever. I don't think we'll see a lot for it because I don't think the movie is going to drive people to the game. I don't think the game is strong enough to drive gamers to the game. I just don't think it's going to be a game line that we see a lot of support for over the next couple of years or at all. I think it may be one of these things where we've got the limited edition core books. We might see the starter box, I think, because I think it's been done and produced and written. It's just a publication distribution issue. We have a GM kit. That's all we're going to get for this, I think. And I think Modafius are the kind of company who's just going to move on to greener pastures, no pun intended.
Like a God Emperor era.
Until lay some fucking seeds, man.
Yeah. No, you're right, man. You're totally right. I think, well, you heard it here first, didn't you? Whatever Modafius end up doing with that line, I can't see it going very far. And that's probably down to what we're talking about. If you want to do Dune right, it's you read the book. I wouldn't play Dune. I'd read it, really. Unless you pitched me a game where I could play as Choam, who are basically the space Tories, and then in which case I'm in.
But that's the thing, isn't it? I think what you really want to do is shoot around the Dune universe, but especially if you just look at Frank's writing, he doesn't concern himself with the comings and goings and the doings and the froings and whatever happens in the rest of the universe. He's only really interested in what happens on Arrakis because that is the focus of his story. Which means it's almost too narrow for an RPG in a way. Yeah. So I get that. As much as I love Dune, I think, and I thought this about the first Dune RPG, which was released by Last Unicorn Games. It was only ever done as a kind of Gen Con release. People who are RPG aficionados will know that it carries a secondary market price. I'm here to tell you right now that whatever people are asking for it on eBay or whatever is not fucking worth it. I bought and sold that book many times for anywhere between 100 and 300 quid. And people asking £10,000 for it and something like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. So if you ever see a book in the wild, please don't pay many more than 3 digits for it because it's simply not worth it. It's really thin. The artwork isn't great. It references source books that were never released. It's interesting. Of course it is. It's a curiosity, and part of the secondary market value is because of its rarity. But the modern Modafius book is a nicer book, bigger, talks about the universe a lot more. It's a lot more playable. So please don't pay over the odds for the Last Unicorn book. I'm here to tell you right now that the secondary market value of that is over-exaggerated and it should fall apart entirely. But neither am I a massive supporter of this new Modafius Dune RPG. I just think, having seen 2 incarnations of this RPG 30 years apart, maybe it's just not a universe that lends itself particularly well to that kind of tabletop game, and maybe we should leave that to Star Wars or Star Trek or bloody, Babylon 5 or whatever it is that you want to do, which all of those are infinitely more interesting than Dune on a wider scale.
I think that's a great summary. I love a bit of Star Trek, man. I'd be more happy playing a Star Trek RPG because that's about the crew on the ship in the universe, isn't it? You can do things with that, and the same with Star Wars. You can get a group of ne'er-do-wells on a spaceship like the Millennium Falcon is in the film, but there's a smuggler and there's the magic type one and there's a funny alien. You can do stuff with it. And Dune doesn't have those same tropes. I think it's just a different type of story. It's just a different.
It is what it does is it forgoes the discussion of the wider universe in order to create a much deeper immersion into the single element that it wants to talk about. And because it focuses so much on Arrakis and the interplay between the power groups that are involved in this power play for the whole universe, but it's all focused on Arrakis. It's a narrow focus, and what we want in our RPGs is a wide focus, because that allows us to go and tell stories in a milieu that we can enjoy. We don't want a super narrow focus. Agreed. I think maybe it's time to stop talking about Dune.
Well, I don't know about that.
An hour. We're over an hour now on Dune.
I think if anyone has played the Modiphius game, let us know, because I was just thinking about it as we're talking about it, and it's been released, but I haven't heard of anyone playing it, or I haven't heard any reviews or blog posts or anything like that from people who've enjoyed it. So,
I read through it and I kind of enjoyed it, and without going over the problems of it or whatever. And there's a suggested adventure in the back of the book, which I think is quite interesting. You know, there's an ornithopter, there's a sandworm, it ticks a lot of boxes. And I just think, right, this is typical. This is typical of what this book is, because you do not provide me an adventure that takes place on some other planet with some other minor houses or whatever. Your suggested adventure in the back of this book is a sandworm, an ornithopter, a fucking spice harvester, House Atreides. It's like
a scene from the book.
Yeah, of course, this is what it's about. So, on one hand, you're telling me to enjoy a wider universe, but on the other hand, you're fervently telling me that actually this is all going to be set on Arrakis the day the fucking first novel starts. So that I think it's a really it ties its own hands in that respect. So I think it's never going to be the kind of game that I'm going to pick up the shelf and want to run loads of random sci-fi games with, because that's not the case.
It's a strange one, but yeah, for people who love RPGs and Dune, they don't go together too well. It's like pizza and ice cream or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, fair.
And if all this talk of visiting the cinema has got you itching for a film to go and watch, but you've already seen Dune, and you want something a little bit different, I can also recommend The Green Knight, which I went to see recently as well, and it's worth a watch, so you can check that out as well.
Didn't you pick up a little starter box game RPG for that a year ago or something?
Yes, I did, yeah. A24 released a RPG of The Green Knight. It wasn't a starter kit, it's a full core book and with an adventure in it. It's got its own system and it's got its own set of dice. Big green box, like a D&D box style.
Any good?
It's alright. It's like one of those Heartbreaker type clones. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a.
Does it manage to portray the atmosphere of the film?
I don't know that it does, really. I don't know that it does. I think the film has this kind of core message that runs through it that is only really resolved right at the very end. The sort of very last few minutes of the film kind of tie everything up into a nice bow, and the credits roll and you go, right. Okay. And they use certain mechanics in the RPG that kind of relate to that. You're trying to be valorous, and your valor rating is your kind of score to keep track of in the RPG.
You're a good guy.
Yeah, but you're a knight. You're a chivalric knight in this era of kind of magic and mystery, and it's about how do you interact with the world and this kind of thing.
Chivalric knights, magic, mystery. Are you providing a tangent for our next subject? Unintentionally, I think you are, right?
I was just laying down a bit of the groundwork there for you, my friend.
I think people who are on our Discord, which you are not. If you are not, then please do come along and chat with us on the Discord. Follow us on Instagram and chat with us and everything. And people who've listened know that I've been a big supporter of the Osprey RPGs so far. And I have mentioned a few times that the newest release, which just came out a couple of days ago, Heirs to Heresy, The Fall of the Knights Templar, is the newest release from Osprey RPGs. So it would be nice to talk about this 185-page tome for a little bit now, I think, as we move on from our film segment. And
yes, segment.
Add some RPGs into this.
Yeah, because I love hearing about these Osprey books every time you bring one on, and they, while differing in quality, are always equally interesting, I think. And I just, the fact that Osprey are out here doing this stuff is just great. So tell us about Heirs to Heresy.
Okay, so Heirs to Heresy is as I mentioned, it's a kind of pretty much 200-page hardback, small format, beautifully produced book by Osprey. The main focus on this, as the title would suggest, is the fall of the Knights Templar in the very early 14th century, and everything connected to that, the history of the Knights Templar, Philip of France wanting to kind of take away their financial and kind of political power in Europe. What I want to say before I get into how Heirs of Heresy is written is I think this is the first point in Osprey's role-playing publishing line where I felt I've stumbled. It had to happen eventually.
It did have to happen eventually.
I've been pretty impressed with almost everything. I mean, for those who listen to us, we talked about Sigil and Shadow, and I supported it, but I also highlighted its flaws. I really wanted to like Heirs to Heresy, and I've been quite excited about it coming out. The background of the Knights Templar is something that appeals to me personally. I've read quite a few books about the history of the Templars and that kind of, Sacred Mystery School, whether it be Tracy Twyman's Baphomet or Holy Blood, Holy Grail or the Hiram Key, all of these kind of, major mainstream conspiratorial books that'll talk about the Templars. I've read that kind of stuff, so I was really interested to look at a role-playing game that would focus on the Knights Templar as the character class that you would then go in and explore the world that they kind of is falling apart around them. So I want to talk about the format of the book first. It starts to present itself as a regular traditional RPG. You have a character, it has attributes and skills. There is a narrative element to Heirs to Heresy that you will play a Knights Templar. I mean that's the default. That is what you play. I mean, I don't think there's any shame in that. There's no problem with that. It does in a way to tick boxes of inclusivism and diversity, which are things that we support here on Human Energy Field. But however, I hate the kind of flag waving of it. It's like you can be a Knights Templar from anywhere. You can be a Knights Templar who is any gender, who is any religion, who is any background, oh man, why? No, the Knights Templar are basically a group of Catholic, older, single white men who have, raped and pillaged their way through the Holy Land, and are living in castles, and let's not pretend. The first thing that they've done is throw out the idea of you playing an actual Knights Templar, and they've said you can play whatever you want. I get why the writer and Osprey have gone in this direction, but it dilutes the core concept of the game so much that I was struggling to buy into it after a couple of chapters of this constant reminder that you can be from anywhere and be anyone and do anything. It's like, we're not playing. You've chosen a time period and a group of people in a time period that were not that diverse. Have the strength of character and design and creativity and writing to just say, like, look, if we're going to play Knights Templar, you're white guys who are Catholics, because that is what you are. Otherwise, we're just making the Knights Templar into some other fantastical version of the Knights Templar which never existed. So you either want to be a pseudo-historical game or you don't. This is the first problem with this.
Right.
The second problem is it constantly reminds us as the reader that this is a narrative game, and that the Grandmaster or the GM.
Ooh, I like Grandmaster. That's nice.
Yeah, that is one of the only cool things in here. The fact that the Grandmaster can make a lot of decisions about the background and why the Templars have been attacked by the King of France and all this kind of stuff. It's so combat orientated throughout the entire book. That it doesn't lend itself to an investigative or a kind of philosophical or an esoteric kind of game that I thought it would be. A lot of the skills and attributes are combat focused, The combat system in itself has a major flaw in it. You have to put tokens in a bag and remove these tokens one by one in order to present a random order of initiative. My problem with this is, in 5 years or 10 years' time, or if I find this in a bookshop, whatever, I want to be able to play this just with some dice or whatever. I don't want to find a bag with some tokens and different colour this and that. And there are these ephemera that you have to a game which distance your group from the narrative and the excitement that's happening. And this is one of those barriers. And it says, oh, look into this side box for an optional initiative system. I thought, well, that's good. I don't like this initiative system. I hate pulling tokens out of a bag. I'd like to read the optional initiative system. The optional initiative system is putting other things in a bag or a hat or whatever.
Weird.
Yeah. It's not even an optional thing. So it's like, so basically you're only telling me that this is the only way I can deal with initiative. It could have been solved with a simple D10 roll, with a quickness, whatever. It could have been very easily resolved. Second issue is it gets into a set of mass battle rules about how your Templar characters can control, I don't know, groups of cavalry or knights or whatever in order to fight against, I don't know, other knights, rabbles, whatever it happens to be. There's a huge page count on this, which just it's overly complicated. It's not very narrative. It talks about like army points in certain units. You move between zones, and then there are special rules which you can give to units and all. And a lot of the powers and esoterica and relics and gifts that you can get affect these combat rules, which are actually quite involved. And even reading them made me really bored by them, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to run anybody through this kind of really artificial combat. It really should have had a narrative element to mass battle, which could have focused on the Knights Templars' bravery, courage, reputation, whatever, in order to swing fights in a certain direction narratively very quickly. But instead, it presents this almost mini game of combat where you're meant to write out like army points on unit cards, and really boring. Yeah, it just not conducive to a kind of narrative, kind of exciting game. I wanted this to be Ars Magica. I wanted this to be Aqualaria. I wanted this to be, Vampire Dark Ages. I wanted this to be this really exciting 14th century game where Templars and no, there's almost none of this in here. There are some travel rules which are really stilted about like rolling a dice every night, whether you're in wilderness or civilization, to see whether it's dangerous or not dangerous, and then what happens, and spending points. There's a lot of points tracking in this game. There's a lot of pools and token pools and stats that you have to keep track of as the GM and the player, which I think every single one of them just removes you from this narrative that you could be having. So yeah, there's a lot of problems.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the stuff that you brought up there. I mean, the random initiative system, the bagged tokens, if you will. I've used this before in Troika, right? And because it's how Troika wants to do initiative. Yes. It makes more sense in Troika because Troika is irreverent and kind of a bit wild and a bit off the rails. It's like your wild card uncle RPG, isn't it, Troika? So that makes more sense to do there. I will, however, say all the Troika that I've run has been during lockdown over webcam, and pulling tokens out of a bag on your webcam to show to the other players on their webcams does not have the same effect at all as doing it around a table. So maybe that's something to be learned from there. I think they could have offered an alternative, even if it was just something like you said, rolling 1d10, if not the characters roll their own or whatever. So I'm with you on that one. That's a bit of a shame. I also think for a game that's so combat heavy, as you say, and to bring in all these rules of zones and points and whatever it's asking you to do in combat, to then leave combat order up to just a bag and not have an actual set of initiative rules for mass battles and stuff, I think that's a stumble. So again, I'm with you on that one. The characters, the Templars themselves, Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying you could play a Templar who isn't a white Catholic, but I also like the appeal of saying this game is about Templars, this is what Templars were, you should play one. And the only kind of answer I can reconcile in my head is that they just should have said both, really. They should have, the character creation should have said, here's what the Templars were, if you want to do it this way, you can. However, if you would prefer to play a game that doesn't shoehorn you into being a white male, then feel free to play anyone you like in any other time period. I think it should have at least mentioned the fact that the Templars were who they were.
I think part of the major flaw in this book, as I read through it, which I have done quite carefully over the last few days, is the fact that it's so careful to be everything it should be to everybody, that it doesn't have the bravery to be a game about what it wants to be about.
Yeah, because, you know, the Templars were, let's face it, horrible, right?
Depending upon they certainly had a very particular religious mindset, a very particular group of people who were involved. It was a certain time. The time period itself suggests that you should be playing where there are prejudices. What you could do is explore that as characters who are, white Catholic martial trained males. Couldn't the interesting thing be about how you interact with other people of other cultures and religions and faiths and backgrounds, rather than default to this really lazy, sad, safe option of going, look, if you want to play a black, disabled, female North African Templar, do it. Like, that doesn't serve any bonus to the game at all, in my opinion.
Fuck's sake.
But it just doesn't. It doesn't serve any purpose to the game. But it would be surely better to say, here we are with this very insular group of people, but what we're going to do is really explore their relationship with other people and explore relationships between different cultures and religions and philosophies and sexes and backgrounds and genders and whatever. And I think that would have been a much more smarter thing to do. But instead, with this book, they've covered their backs at every angle.
Yeah, because that's the culture clash, isn't it? Is the Templars meeting other groups, and you send them off from their homeland of Western Europe or wherever they're from, out into these, Jerusalem and these desert regions where they're not local and they're not accustomed to the cultures, and that would be where the conflicts were and the drama happens to me in a Templars game.
And that could have been really interesting. That could have been but there's none of that. There's all about how do we fight a mob of people when they're in zone 1 and I'm in zone 2, but then my relic gives me a +2 to my damage reduction, and it's all like, hang on, you're just distancing away from anything interesting that I could have what I want to read about is why me as a Catholic Templar who's been living, in the ruins of the Temple of Solomon, what could my interaction be with a Moorish scholar? Or the Spanish Inquisition, or anybody from a pagan background or whatever, and how would that make me look at my religion and their religion and all this kind of stuff? It fails at every conceivable level, this book, to explore any of this idea. The writer is careful to suggest that there are optional and varying reasons why the Templars A became very successful and B then had a fall. So anyone who doesn't really know the background of the Templars, they became very successful in the early 12th century, became a massively dominant religious and martial organization within Europe, and then were preyed upon in the early 1300s, particularly by Philip of France, and put to ruin, and the Templars fled. And that is the rise and fall of the Knights Templar. But what we don't have in this book is any real discussion of why the Templars rise and fall. The book seems to offer a few suggestions, but it never really tells you. It does this amazing thing where it continuously tells you through the this is your game, do what you want. This is your game, do what you want. By the time I'd read "This is my game, do what I want" 12 times, I'd be like, well, if it was my game, do what I want, I'd be fucking writing it. What I want you to tell me how the world is, how the Templars became famous, why they're falling, what the background is, and I'll play along with this, and I'll change some stuff. Instead, what they do is they just give you wishy-washy options, none of which are explored in any depth, unfortunately. And the way the writer puts it forward is the most boring idea about why the Templars became famous and then fell is this kind of European political machinations between families, which is just, for a role-playing game, it's the most boring reason why the Templars became famous and unfamous. I want them to have found the Holy Grail, or I want them to have found the gift to immortality, or dealt with demons, or found Baphomet's head in the desert, and then all of these really exciting things which are kind of slightly mentioned in the book, which are just not explored. This is the worst, is a really bad example of how a writer nowadays has to make sure that they're totally safe. They've protected themselves at every corner, and because of that, they've written something that just doesn't engage me at all.
Right, they've not struck the balance correctly. So you think Osprey kind of flew too close to the sun with this one a little bit?
No, they haven't flown close enough to the sun. This is the whole problem. They've stayed so low that the wax which binds the feathers of Daedalus and Icarus have remained intact. This is the problem. They're flying so close to the sea that it's just so safe. This is the problem, and it's to pick such a time period full of religious fervour and differences between opinions and culture clashes and whatever. It could have been really exciting, but what they've done is go, well, we don't want to upset anybody. Whoa. No, let's not upset anybody. Let's just assume whatever you want to assume. And there are pages set aside in this book about basically it mentions an X card without mentioning an X card, and it mentions post-game communication between the GMs and whatever, and it reads like a new age, make sure everyone's okay, make sure you're okay, make sure we're not talking about anything religious or gender specific or whatever, and I'm just like, come on guys, you've ruined everything by just being so safe that there is nothing here to cling on to.
I mean, the Templars that's some heavy historical subjects that you're dealing with. It does need a little bit of that, doesn't it?
Does it? Well, why write about the Templars if you're not going to get stuck into this? If you're not going to get stuck into it properly, why write about the Templars? You might as well just be doing some bog standard shit fantasy RPG.
Well, that kind of sounds like what it is.
It is.
To be honest with
you,
it is that. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. But if that aside, if Osprey, who are this kind of historical company, for lack of a better term, I guess, want to do an RPG about the Templars, probably the first thing they're going to be thinking is, oh, hang on, well, the Templars actually weren't really that nice of a people, so we better make sure, if we're going to do this, that we make sure that it's a safer version of the Templars, so that we're not just saying, you can play a bunch of rapists,
Yeah. But then this is Saturday morning cartoon 4-color Templars. This is let's have one young white Templar, let's have one young white female Templar, let's have one young black Templar, let's have one young female black Templar. When 3 of those people wouldn't be Templars, they would be killed by the Templars.
Yeah, right. They would be killed outright by them.
So it's just come on, if this is what you're going to do, if you're going to get into what is arguably some of the most esoteric and shrouded in mystery, historical and religious and philosophical ideas of the last 500 years, then have the balls to get into it, man. Why are they digging into the ruins of the Temple of Solomon? What are they finding out? What is their relationship with the powers of Europe in this place? If you're going to play a Templar, are you the good guys or are you the bad guys? There's a whole premise in this which is really forced. The fact that you start the game in Paris in 1307, and it's when the King of France declares the Templars kind of, bad and moves against them. And the whole game is meant to start with you as the Templars fleeing the Paris Chantry with whatever relics that you have, which you are given a little bit of idea about, but not really. Fleeing to an idea where you're not given much of an idea about where you're fleeing to. Through country which you're not giving much of an idea to flee to. It's just well, hang on, man. You're giving us this really railroad adventure that you want us to follow, but then you're giving us no option. I cannot explain my frustration at every single time this book suggests to me that I, as the GM, should be making up something.
I've always kind of hated that in books when they just kind of leave it up to you. I always thought that was quite lazy.
Because if it was up to me, I would have written this game on my own, and I could have probably written a better one. So what I'm buying this book for is for an adventure, is for suggestions, is for
Content,
yeah. And I'm not getting any content. I'm getting pages and pages of the writer telling me that it's up to me, and it's like, I'm good enough in my gaming career that I can come up with some of this stuff. But if I'd bought this, and this is one of the first RPGs I'd bought, I'd be like, shit, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't got any ideas. Like, why aren't you telling me what these things are? You're just telling me to suggest. And if he tells us once in this book, he tells us 100 times that if it doesn't work for your group, do it differently. If someone's upset, do it differently. If this rule doesn't work for you, do it differently. And it's like, I get it, man. You don't need to keep telling me that if I don't like the rule, I don't need to use it. You could tell me that once at the front of the book. All of this is subject to change. Make this game what you will. One sentence, one paragraph at the front of any RPG that I've read over the last 30 years is good enough for me to know that I can change that game.
Yeah, I like to think it's a bit of an unspoken rule at this point.
As if I even needed permission to change the rules in the game. But then somebody has to continuously tell me through this book. My worry for this is that this is written for an audience that's never played an RPG, that is so worried about being upset about anything that they need constant reminders page after page that this is an inclusive, safe space that they can play in. And to be honest, if I could pick a time period in a group of people that is not conducive to kind of racial diversity and religious tolerism, then I would pick 14th century Europe with the Templars. I mean, these guys are literally burning each other and killing each other and murdering each other over slight religious deviations in dogma. I mean, like, that's what this time period is about. So in order to kind of give it this Rugrats feel, is just to destroy everything I wanted from this.
Templars on bikes.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And this is without any of the technical and editorial errors which have crept into this book. I haven't noticed any editorial errors in the Osprey book so far, but it's really interesting. There's a section on what we're going to call magic items, relics. They talk about the Holy Grail, and it seems to cut off quite quickly. And then 3 or 4 pages later, I'm reading about a sword. And then at the end of this paragraph, I'm reading about the Holy Grail. And it's a literal cut and paste. And then I'm reading the pre-gen characters. And it's
messy, ain't it, though?
Yeah, I think the attribute scores, the skill scores, which are given out to certain pre-gen characters, and there's only 4 pre-gens. I believe 2 of them are wrong. The actual numbers that have been put into the pre-generated character sheets are wrong because of how I understand focused versus derivative characters. But without getting too mechanical into it, I was like, out of 4 pre-gen characters, you've got 2 of them wrong. And that's an editorial oversight. There's other stuff in
here.
Very
lazy, isn't it?
Very lazy. There's in one page it tells you about starvation, and it literally says, don't worry about food. Templars can beg, steal, or borrow food from anywhere. The very next page gives you rules for how to find food on the road. And I'm like, you guys need to make your mind up about what is this situation. In combat, there's a thing called, which is quite interesting, there's a thing called mobs. So mobs are, as you can understand, huge groups of characters who individually have no real kind of importance, but in a group would cause problems for the characters, whether they be cultists or soldiers or angry mobs in towns or whatever. Now, mobs are given a stamina stat, which is obviously the amount of damage they can take. And they're also given a morale stat, which is the amount of damage they can take before they disperse and run away. Why do they have a stamina stat, which is double their morale stat? So a mob of humans has a stamina of 24. Their morale is 12. So once they take 12 damage, the game tells you that the mob will run away. Done, defeated. Why give them 24 stamina? Why not just give them 12? There is no explanation and no possible way that they can avoid the morale rules to keep fighting once they've lost more than 12 hit points from that mob. And whether it's a design flaw that hasn't been picked up in post-edit, or I just don't know. But it's like, well, you've told me that this mob can take 24 points of damage, but then in the same breath, you're telling me that after 12 points, they will run away.
Oh, damn, this is making me sad.
It made me very sad. And this is part of all of the errors that have crept in through this. yeah, I mean, that's just to get into it. And there's a lot about the skills and attributes that don't really work very well for me. There's some minor esoterica rules in here about blessings and gifts and spells. There is 8 pages of demons.
Okay.
Each one is only given, sadly, a single sentence as a description, and what the demon can offer you as a bonus. Most of them are combat related, which is just lends itself to exactly where the game wants to draw you to. And then after 8 pages of demons, it gives you half a page of angels.
Huh.
Yeah. So, anyone who's even a minor scholar in kind of, medieval, Kabbalistic or religious thought knows that there are scores of angels and scores of demons. Then why not give us loads of angels that you can contact and all the benefits that it can give you, not just the demons and the benefits that it can give you. It makes no sense. It's just lazy.
Tell me if I'm wrong, as you have the book there in front of you, but the fact that it's including demons and angels that I imagine on some level can be interacted with by the player characters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that in mind, then this game is not historically accurate, is it? Because there's demons and angels in it, so already they've kind of blown up that historical accuracy.
I mean, it depends upon your historical worldview. What we can say is it's historically accurate to the way people viewed the world at that time.
Okay, right, but there is magic.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't get me wrong. There isn't fireballs in here and that. I must defend it in that point of view. There isn't magic missiles and fireballs and web and featherfall and all of these D&D spells. The spells are, you need to draw out a sigil on the ground and spend X amount of hours summoning a demon, and that's all really fun. But then the demon offers you something like, for the next 6 combat rounds, you can have +2 defense damage dice, and it's like, oh my god, that's so boring. Like, why would I summon Prince Priamon on his flaming camel with his ascendance of flute players and worry about the fact that he wants to eat me if I step outside the circle, and then he offers me damage reduction for the next combat I'm in. I'm like, oh, whatever, man. Fuck off. That's so boring. So
okay. So I have some follow-up questions because you're right. That just sounds messy as hell and really like they missed out on a lot of good opportunities, because there's a lot you can do with that stuff, man.
There's a lot you can do with it, and they don't do any of it.
They don't do any of it, and that's a real shame. Coming from someone who has written something in this vein that's going to be released at some point. Listeners, you heard it here first. The author of this book, is it attributed to a single author, and does that author hold any other writing credits for previous Osprey products?
The title on the front of the book is Alan Bear. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. Sorry, Alan, if I'm not.
Sorry, Alan, we know you're listening.
B-A-H-R, Alan Bear. He does not have any writing credits on any previously released Osprey RPGs, as far as I know. I don't know what he's done before this. I'm sure he's done some other stuff. I don't know if there is a foreword or whatever to what he's done. Maybe not. I can't see it. I don't remember reading what he's done. If you've done something else, Alan, I'm sorry, but this is the only thing I've read from you. And I understand maybe the constraints that you've been put under in order to write this. And I can only apologise for the fact that I didn't enjoy it. But,
sorry, Al.
But nonetheless, I didn't. And some of these things I've mentioned, maybe some of these editorial problems and mechanical problems, and maybe things that have crept in. That's not Alan's fault, and maybe he wanted to produce something that was a bit bigger and more interesting, but because of commercial and cultural pressures, that he's had to write this super soft game that I can imagine handing out to 12-year-olds at a con. And they wouldn't be offended by it.
Okay, right. So let me follow up, because I've got 2 more questions that I want to ask you about this. What are the character classes? What's character creation like? Who can I play? Is it like fighter, magician type?
You play a Knights Templar. So I mean, it says to you will play a Knights Templar. But then in the same sentence it says, you can play any kind of Knights Templar you want. What you should be playing a Knights Templar is you should be a guy who knows how to use a sword, fire a crossbow, probably reads the Bible quite a lot, and hates Muslims. And that's kind of what you are as a Knights Templar. But what it suggests is you are a Knights Templar first, and then you can almost have like a subclass. So like, Are you like an entertainer? Are you like a scholar? Are you a fighter? Whatever. And again, it's so light on giving you any real advice towards it. You have a couple of choices in character creation. You choose to be kind of focused or narrow in your development of attributes and then skills. So you can choose to have an all-rounder, or you can choose to have someone who's super focused on a couple of skills. And they're the only two real character choices. The rest of it is left to this kind of amorphous, you can give yourself an afro and like kind of one green eye and one blue eye and 6 foot tall gay person married to two people or whatever you want to be. It's very comforting and very open about you can do whatever you want with your Knights Templar. That's fine, but like, come on, guys. Like, were there really many like dark-skinned female Templars? Like, I'm willing to bet not. And you could probably get into some sort of pseudo-historical argument with would-be scholars about this, but I'm willing to bet that pretty much 99.99% of Knights Templar were Catholic, straight, white, old men. And that is what it is, because that is what the group was, and that's what it accepted. They were the vows, that was a religious. You had to be a Catholic. To not be a Catholic means you couldn't be a Templar. So there is not this diversity in understanding in religious and scientific and philosophical viewpoints, because you're playing a Templar.
But it's almost like they could have just said Fantasy Knights, the game.
Yeah.
And
they would have been much better off saying that, because then it would have allowed them all of this weird kind of super inclusivism that they want to put through this book.
I hope people listening to this understand where you're coming from. It's not about anything against any particular group of people. It's just about here's something that is a good historical period, and I would like to see it done correctly, and it hasn't been. I think
I am to lay down to put the party line down. I am the biggest supporter of diversity, true equity, true equality between people. I
know this.
I believe in do what thou will should be the whole of the law. Love and the will, love is the law. Like, be good to other people. Do the will of the universe. Do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt other people. And if you can support other people doing that, then you are doing the will of the universe, and the universe will be behind you. Support other people, love yourself, they will love you. That is the best way forward for all of us. And
I can attest to that.
Most of the things that make us different do not make us different at all. We are similar in so many ways that we are different. And to focus on the things that make us different rather than the things that make us the same is a shame. However, all that aside, we are talking about a fantasy role-playing game that is not real world, that is not real life, that takes place in a table in a historical time period, which is only pseudo-historic. It's got fantastical elements to it. If you want to play a game where you are playing Knights Templar, just play Knights Templar. There's no shame in that. There's no whatever. I would love to sit around a table with people of different heights and genders and cultures and religions and whatever, and we can all play Knights Templar together, right? Part of what makes that interesting is exploring this very different mindset, historically, culturally, everything about role-playing should be about an escape from real life and enjoying whatever it is we put on the table. Now, I haven't sat down to write a Knights Templar game. Somebody has. Alan has. Osprey's signed it off. Now,
cheers, Al.
Yeah, cheers, Al. Great. Like, I can see through the cracks of the terrible mortar in this game where the love for Alan's love for the Knights Templar really is, and I get that, and I know he must have read about the Knights Templar, and I know he probably knows more about the Knights Templar than a lot of other people do, but this game has not allowed him to present those ideas and that background knowledge to the general reader who wants to play this game, and I can only assume that it's because of worries and concerns that this book will be presented as, Jesus Christ, no pun intended by that there. But like, these guys wear white robes with red crosses. Like, the modern world we live in associates this with like, New Reich hate, kind of, all of this kind of stuff. This kind of iconography has been hijacked by groups who want to be proud of hate and kind of division. But, I mean, nobody sitting down to play a Knights Templar game should be like, well, I'm going to play Knights Templar because I absolutely hate blacks and I love whites. And I hate Muslims and I love Christians and I'm a super Catholic.
Understood.
And if you are, that's a bigger problem than this game is presenting. And that's a bigger problem than this podcast can handle. You know, if you're the kind of guy who wants to sit down and play that kind of game, then I'm not entirely certain I can help you. I want to try. But really what I want to focus on is a group of people getting together to have fun playing a game. That is where I'm at with this. And if I want to have fun playing a game where we're playing Knights Templar, then I think we have to assume we're playing Knights Templar and not something else. Because you're right. Otherwise, why didn't I just call it Fantasy Rainbow Knights? Because that's what it becomes at that point.
Yeah. And I'm thinking now about in terms of the context of saying we want to sit down at the table and play a game and have fun, and the fact that this game is a Templars game. I'm thinking about imagining playing a game. Let's say there's 4 of us, and we're Knights Templar. We've come from Paris. We're in, I don't know, Jerusalem somewhere. And maybe we encounter a tribe of the natives, and then one Templar is particularly zealous and quick to draw his sword, and bloodshed occurs before it can be stopped, and the Templars are kind of chased out of town. And then there's another scene later on where they have to go and build a fire because the Templars are like survivalists, aren't they? And they have to go and forage for food and live out in the wild between these towns, and the Templars are sitting around a campfire, and maybe one of them's a more scholarly type and one of them's this more kind of quick to anger martial type, and the characters are talking to each other about, well, why do you think that happened back at the natives' village, and do you think you could have played any differently, and what does that mean to you, the fact that you took the life of that native person just because you thought his faith was different to yours, or because his skin is different colour? And I'm picturing this campfire conversation happening between these Templars, and that's only really interesting if they're from a different culture to where they are, because that's where the clashes is. You want the cultures to be different so that they clash, so that there's drama, so that you can explore that.
I couldn't have put that better. I think if you were playing a group of white Catholic older martial men, and then your characters are put in a position where they have to interact with people of different cultures and religions and whatever, that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah,
can we then explore, do the characters then realize that their Templar beliefs are wrong? Do they then change their opinions over several sessions of play? Are they awakened to other religious ideas? Does that become this kind of crisis of faith that they could play through? These are the really interesting things. But what is to stop an older woman of an ethnic minority role-playing as an older white Catholic man? Because I would like to think that if I wanted to, a table that I could sit down on would allow me to play an older black woman as a character. And if would somebody have a problem with me doing that? But then as an older black woman, can I not play a young white man? Because surely it's about putting ourselves into other positions, but then using our real world knowledge of what's right and wrong as a yardstick to explore the fantasy interactions between our characters and other characters. You're absolutely right. There's the pathos. There is the emotional payoff between looking at, what happened there? Why would you do that? 2 white men, Catholics, talking to each other about why one drew a sword and one didn't, could be the entire crux of a scenario. That would be beautiful to look at. Yeah, I get it. This book provides none of that.
Right, well, fuck this book off then.
That's what it should do, right? That's what it should do. I'm with you.
Yes.
I want to sit down and use the Knights Templar as a vehicle to explore these religious and philosophical and ideas about culture and religion, and even in their historical place, to think, oh my God, if I was a Knights Templar back then, would I be shocked by the way that the other Templars are behaving towards these other people? Could we meet one of Saladin's envoys, and could he heal us on the road? And then would that become a whole Samaritan thing about, well, why have they healed us? And then, is that right? Do I even want to be healed by somebody who's of a different religion? And then it makes me question my own religion. And then what is the Grail? And then what is the secret of King Solomon? All of these things could have been really, really interesting, but instead they just want to tell us about zones and archers who can fire +1 damage reduction over another zone, and how many pursuit points you have when the Inquisition are chasing you down. And it's not. There isn't enough in here to make it what I wanted. Unfortunately, what I really was excited about just doesn't come through in the book. And again, I'm being an apologist for the writer. I don't know him. I've never spoke to him. I can only assume he wanted to do a better job on this book than he has. But to me, this is a third-rate, super inclusive DCC version of kind of Knights Templar, where anybody can do what they want, say what they want, think what they want, play any game that they want, because the writer and the publisher are too afraid to pin down any real viewpoints.
Yeah, shit, man. I mean, I don't know if this is the most controversial thing I've said so far on the podcast, but if there was ever going to be a game that would be better off for just having white men as the player characters, this might be it. Is that bad? Is that a bad thing for me to say? I don't know. That's that's like you said. That's where the pathos is having that clash between the cultures. Now you don't get that with a diverse group of player characters. Fuck, man, I'm really conflicted now. I'm sorry, listeners. I don't know what to think. My head hurts.
The fact that this game said to me that I can play, a North African female polyamorous Knights Templar, that didn't make me feel like this was going to be a better game. That made me feel like this actually it's just too diffuse, and it just hasn't had the courageousness to follow the real core of what this game should be about, and the bravery to challenge these tough questions of prejudice and diversity and inclusivism on the nose, rather than just go, you guys can play whatever you want, don't worry about that. No, be brave and say you're all going to play white Catholic men, and then explore what it's like to be in this really narrow mindset. And let's have the game expand your knowledge of other people and cultures and places and classes in order for us to, as a group, maybe grow and learn. That would be great. That would be fantastic. Yeah. Start off as a narrow character, then allow the game to present you learning opportunities, rather than just be too weak to go, oh no, you're okay. You can be a woman married to a woman who's from the Philippines, but as a Knights Templar, that's fine, because to tell you otherwise would be to curtail your freedom somehow. Like, what?
So yeah, be bold. Okay, so last question, and this is a good one because I like it when you ask me this question about books. So I think it's safe to say if you wanted to run a Templars game, you wouldn't really be going near this book anytime soon. Yeah. So what would you use to run a game like the one we've been dreaming exists? What system would you use? Is there anything from this book that you would take, or would you just go elsewhere entirely? How would Jamie run a Templars game?
Okay, so I think what I would use is I would go to the Old World of Darkness, and there is a supplement for Vampire called the Inquisition, and it allows you to play mortal members of the Church. It's particularly balanced towards the modern age, the 80s, early 90s when it was written, but it allows you to play in a historical time period if you want to, and it basically puts forward that idea that you can play members of the Church, whether they be scholars, warriors, researchers, or whatever, in this kind of supernatural, semi-esoteric, mystical background, which I think is what you want from a Templars game. You want spells, you want curses and blessings and all this kind of stuff. You don't want to play too straight historical. You want to have that kind of supernatural element of it, which is why I would maybe use the World of Darkness, because it's a great narrative system. It presents itself well for storytelling over combat. You can play combat in World of Darkness, of course you can, but it's geared towards social interaction and all that kind of stuff. I think to give Heirs to Heresy some form of complement, then I would maybe steal some of the... There's a pursuit mechanic where you are assumed to be fleeing Paris at the start of the game, and you are pursued by X group, whether it be the Inquisition, another set of knights, Philip of France's forces, whoever it be that chases you. Now, I don't really like the mechanical aspect of having pursuit points and like adding a point now here and there and reducing a point here and there. But I think having some sort of yardstick for how the group who is chasing you down, how they are doing in terms of putting pressure on you and getting closer to you or further away from you, and that being directly connected to the actions that the group takes, I think is quite interesting. So if you spend too long in a town and you cause a fuss and start a fight, then that actually adds +1 pursuit point, because people are going to talk about you and do whatever. And I think that's an interesting narrative tool that you could maybe tie into a group going, look, you guys need to keep your head down. You need to not cause a fuss. You need to take roads less traveled. You need to like not burn the inn down, all this kind of stuff, because that's how you're going to get away from your pursuers. But if you cause fights and, kill people and stomp through town and get drunk or whatever, then people are going to catch up with you very quickly. And I think that's an interesting pursuit mechanic. Whether I would do it quite as mechanically and mathematically as this book does, probably not. But maybe I would create some sort of yardstick, some sort of barometer where I could indicate to the group how much of a fuss they were making. But again, would I really want to, in an ideal world, make that a bit more narrative, I think, rather than make it super mathematical, which this book just leans back on maths at every point. It wants pursuit points, it wants travel points, it wants like faith points, it wants damage reduction. And it's like, for something that at the beginning seems to be really proud about its kind of narrative storytelling.
I was going to say, yeah, you said it claims to be a narrative book, you said.
And it's not. It really isn't, because we're keeping track of so many points and tokens and, initiative tokens in a bag and all this kind of stuff. Like, no, I'm not interested in any of that. So to me, if I wanted to do a game about the Knights Templar, then I would use the World of Darkness system. You could use D&D for people who are listening to this who aren't, old school World of Darkness fans like me, but, you can use D&D and just make all of the character classes human and all of them fighters, and just go from there. And you do a lot of research. There's some really interesting stuff about 12th, 13th and 14th century Europe, about the divisions of the kingdoms in Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, and Outremer, and the switching of hands of the places in the Holy Lands between Christians and Muslims and everything. There's some really interesting stuff that you can get into. I mean, go and watch Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven. What a movie! That is a great movie to inspire you to want to go and do some role playing in the Holy Lands. That is what I wanted from Heirs to Heresy, and that unfortunately is not what I got.
Yeah, I was wondering how long it would take before one of us mentioned Kingdom of Heaven.
It's so good, right? I mean, it almost shouldn't be that good, but it is. It's almost better than it should be.
I just love Liam Neeson wielding a broadsword. I just give me that all day, every day. What I mean? Whether it's Rob Roy or Kingdom of Heaven.
That first big fight scene in the woods is just. That's every RPG fight scene I want. Like, it's absolutely amazing. So yeah, just watch Kingdom of Heaven, and that's what I want from Heirs to Heresy, and it's not what I got, unfortunately.
Wicked. Okay. Damn, Osprey. They had to stumble at some point, didn't they? Shame.
To be honest, it's £25 retail. It's a small book. It's very available. If you have no background in the Templars at all, and you want a kind of semi-D&D European... even then I'm saying it, and it's so hard for me to recommend this to somebody, because I think if I had recommended this to you and you spent 25 quid on it, I'd be disappointed if someone recommended this to me. It's the first one. It's the first Osprey book that I felt that I haven't got my money's worth. And I know, I'm blessed that £25 to me isn't a huge amount of money. Of course it is, but it's an amount of money I can afford to spend. And that is not the same for everybody else. So for somebody to shell out £25 for this, I would probably say to the people that £25 means a lot more to them. I'd be like, do not spend £25 on this, because you are not going to get that money's worth out of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Buy Righteous Blood, Ruthless Blade instead, maybe.
Fuck, damn yeah. Yeah, buy Jackals. Buy almost any other Osprey role-playing game. And this isn't me, like, jumping ship and saying Osprey is shit, like, fuck Osprey. I stand by everything I've said about how good some of those Osprey books have been, but I'm not going to sit here and say that this new one is good when it's not, unfortunately. And it really upset me, actually, because because they've all been so good, when it came through in the post, I was really excited to read it, and I devoured it in like 2 days. And I was just shaking my head through most of it. It's just such a shame.
Oh yeah, I can imagine your disappointment, mate, as well, because I know you're probably really buzzing for them to tackle the Templars.
Really bad.
Yeah, bless you. Well, I mean, I've got other stuff on my notepad here for us to talk about, but we've run out of time. What a surprise!
Shit, man. Are we at that point already?
Can't believe that. We cannot, in good faith, continue this episode any further if we want to stick to any kind of consistency in our releases and our times. We can't talk about Guelph as much as I want to hear about Guelph, and we cannot either address how to run a good horror game, which would be great.
That's a shame, because really tonight we should have talked about horror rather than Dune and Heresy.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, such a shame. And we had loads of good suggestions today. We want to talk about making believable dungeons. We want to talk about anxiety prep. We want to talk about immersion at the table through lighting and handouts and background stuff, and what makes a creepy RPG. There's loads of stuff that interesting mechanics, tie-in novels. We've got so many subjects lined up that we want to and are going to talk about.
As is often the case, there's a lot of stuff on lists for us to tackle, and never enough time for us to tackle it all. Which, as I'm sure listeners are aware by now, what are we, 19 episodes in? That seems to be the pattern with us. There's so much stuff we want to do, and there's just not enough time to tackle it all. And that's a common occurrence here at Hef, isn't it? So I hope that's not a bittersweet ending for everyone. But do stay tuned for the next episode, which hopefully we're going to have our good friend Ager come back on for
is that
the
right?
next episode.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because it's like an anniversary, right? So because Ager was on our very first episode. Yeah, we're going to get him on for like okay, that's cool. I love that.
Yeah, man. So we're going to do the 1 year episode, 1 year anniversary episode. Next up, we're going to get our good friend David Ager back on, and I think he might have some good insights into some of the suggestions that you've just made, talking about getting anxiety for prepping a game, talking about unique mechanics in RPGs, talking about ways to increase immersion in games, how to make games creepier, how to make horror games more effective, how to make dungeons challenging, what does verisimilitude mean? All of these questions, all of these questions that we have to pose and hopefully answer during the recordings, hopefully Ager can help us out with. So stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to us chat about Dune and Heirs to Heresy for 2 hours. As always, I've had a great time. Have you had a great time, Jamie?
I have. I can't believe we talked about two things for 2 hours. I can't believe it, but I can't believe it.
But that's just, sometimes we start it off free form and we see where things go, and that's just where this one went. So, that's just the style, isn't it, I guess?
It is.
It is. What can we say other than thank you for listening, as always, and we hope you've enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next one. It's nearly 1 year of Human Energy Field, guys. Can you believe it? So, next episode, we'll celebrate it officially. But for now, stay tuned. Stay safe.
And stay hydrated.